Well, thank you all for coming today. We're very fortunate to have Eric Greenberg here to talk to us about Generation We, a book that was recently published on the Millennial generation. Eric's journey to write this book and really to figure out the questions that he posed in this book began in 2004 when he was hiking in Peru and was realizing that the world that is going to be left to the future generation, of which his kids belong, is really in a kind of precarious state, where there are questions about the kind of financial solvency, environmental and energy issues, and a lot of human rights and global issues that are really going to be issues that we'll be answering as millennials in years to come. And so Eric's quest is really one which he wanted to find out answers about what this generation believes and kind of how this generation will look forward and govern the world in the future. And he wrote a lot about this in his book, and it's got some very interesting findings. I think you'll find it very, very insightful. Unfortunately, all of you got a copy. And with that, I'll turn over to Eric. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Adam. So we have a nice, comfortable, small group today. So I'm gonna open this up for a lot more questions than if it were a big audience. And what I'd like to do is start off with, first of all, thanking you for your time and your attention. And let me help you understand why I wrote this book in the first place, because I'm not a millennial. I'm 44.25 today, exactly. So I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I was talking to one of my dear friends, Larry Brilliant, who runs Google.org. And Larry had just told me about a panel he moderated with the Dalai Lama. And he said, he asked him, what do you think the biggest problem in the world is? And the Dalai Lama said to him, it's a problem and it's an opportunity. The problem is that the youth of the world don't know that they have a lot in common, and they are the ones that can solve the world's problems. The opportunity is, if they do understand this, we can see sweeping change in the world. Right now, over half the world's population is under 28 years old, and the millennial generation, which we define, we call it Generation We, is born between 1978 and 2000. There are 95 million millennials in this country right now. In 2016, when they reach full voting age, there'll be 100 million millennials versus currently 78 million baby boomers today, and probably about 73 or 74 million baby boomers with attrition at that time. So what you have is a generation coming to power in a time of great transformational shift in the world. And by a 99 percentage, millennials saw themselves as being a unique and distinct generation. And in fact, they saw themselves as having more in common with young people overseas as with older people in this country. What I was really surprised about is that the generation is not bitter with the other generations in this country. It just wants to fix the mess we're in. There's a very strong activist sense to the generation. I'm going to read you a couple of statistics really quickly to give you an idea of just how driven the millennials are. By a 91% rate, they believe that every country has an obligation to leave itself as well off, or its descendants as well off or better off than it assumed. The state of the world which it inherited, which is consistent with other generations. But right now, I'm going to read you a couple of quotes from our survey. What we did is we spent 18 months studying the generation, and we did a proprietary survey last year of 2,000 people and followed up with 12 focus groups in four cities: LA, Birmingham, suburban Denver, and New York, with all different types of ethnicities. In fact, we even did 2 focus groups with evangelical Christians to understand how they viewed this. What we found is that people agreed on 85% of the issues. And as a generation, the generation is thinking quite alike. So after reviewing something like 70 pieces of publicly and privately available data and putting social and political scientists on this for 18 months, and with our own research behind it, we then put the book together to help the generation understand a few things. First, how powerful the generation is in and of itself. Secondly, what are you thinking? And what are they thinking? And exactly how do they interpret the world that they're assuming? And the third thing is, well, given that, what do you do to prepare an agenda that the youth then go about implementing in order to fix the world that they're in. And so that was the whole thesis behind the book. And what we want to do is base it on facts. But it is a book of opinion and facts. And really, what we did is we turned down a couple of major publishing contracts for the book because we decided to publish it as open source. So what you have here is a physical copy of it. And it's available physically because a lot of people like to read this way. But if you go out to the web at genwe.org or genwe.com, you'll find that the book's available for free download, along with all the research that went behind it. It's open source. It's out there, given away for free. So that way, barriers and distance or anything else can't get in the way of this information getting into the hands of the people that need it, not only here or internationally. So I'm going to play a video for you, which we released a day and a half ago, which is now at 700,000 views. Thank you, YouTube, and on Vimeo, and a few others. I did the space bar. Space bar.
I'm one.
I'm one.
I'm one.
I'm one.
I'm one.
I'm one. I'm one.
I'm one.
I'm one.
For the past 40 years,
The political and social agenda of the United States
has been set by our parents, the baby boomers.
Who were the largest generation in America.
Not anymore.
A new generation
A new generation.
is coming to power.
They call us the Millennials.
But you can call us Generation We.
Generation We.
In 2016,
The youngest of us will reach voting age.
making us the largest generational voting bloc in the country.
And we're unlike any.
that's come before us. We.
We are more globally oriented.
We're more ethnically diverse.
We're more technologically adept. Better educated.
Less politically partisan.
And we're the first generation in American history
To inherit a nation
In decline.
in decline.
Our national debt
It's $10 trillion.
That's $30,000 of debt.
$30,000 in debt.
For every man, woman, and child. Our educational system
Our educational system is failing.
We have the highest child poverty rate.
in the developed world. Some of us are losing our homes.
Our dependence on fossil fuels
Has polluted our environment. Our water is contaminated.
and our health is endangered.
Half of us
Half of us will get cancer.
1 in 3 will develop diabetes. Our lifespan is expected to be less
less than our parents.
Even though they live in the world's wealthiest nation, Generation We are inheriting a damaged future and a set of potentially catastrophic problems. But we have every reason to be optimistic. These kids identify themselves as strongly progressive and are fed up with partisan politics. They're socially tolerant, environmentally conscious, and peace-loving. They volunteer in record numbers. They're technologically brilliant. And most importantly, they're politically engaged. They believe they can restore the American dream. Generation We is poised to lead the change we need. Our collective future depends on it. Now, will we listen to them?
We,
The youth of the United States.
We, the youth of the United States.
Believe our birthright has been betrayed.
Our inheritance
Has been squandered.
We will not accept a cruel and unfair future.
Of incomprehensible debt.
punitive taxation,
Economic disparity.
military conflict,
Chronic disease.
An environmental disaster.
We must restore and protect.
We must restore and protect
our environment and the planet.
We must provide quality nutrition and health care.
For all youth.
We must provide equality of education.
And learning resources.
For all people and economic classes. We must end the perception
We must end the perception
that America is an arrogant.
arrogant and greedy nation.
we must vote.
We must vote.
We must vote in unprecedented numbers
And exert our political power.
to create a just
and sustainable world.
We are the largest demographic group in the United States, and once unified, we can control America's political landscape.
This Millennial Declaration.
This Millennial Declaration is a call to action.
It is the beginning of a nationwide movement to restore our future.
save our nation,
and preserve our planet.
We're gonna make history.
We're gonna make history.
Will you join us?
Will you join us? Will you join us?
Will you join us? Please visit our website,
genwe.org.
And support Project Free,
Our call to the government
to create a multi-billion-dollar program
similar to the Apollo space program.
To innovate the next generation
of non-fossil fuel-based energy solutions.
It is the call and legacy
Of Generation We.
of Generation We.
And it'll be a key turning point
In the history of mankind.
In the history of mankind.
So we just released this video to kind of take us to where we want to go with this book. I'm just going to read a few statistics, and I'm going to start talking about why this is really important. And these are responses from the youth themselves. Young Americans must take action now to reverse the rapid decline of our country. If we wait until we're older, it'll be too late. 89% agreed and 48% strongly agreed. Now this is bipartisan when you hit these kind of numbers. Life in the future in America will be much worse unless my generation of Americans takes the lead in pushing for change. 85% agreed and 42% strongly agreed. My generation of Americans has better opportunities to make a difference and produce structural change than previous generations. 79% agreed and 31% strongly. And over three-quarters, 78%, said they're willing to make significant sacrifices in their own lives to address major economic, social, political, and other types of issues. Now, why does this get important? This world that we have given the youth is in a complete state of disarray. Just today, the Russians closed their stock markets until Tuesday because of massive commodity deflation and the lack of credit in the markets. We don't know how bad the financial future of our country is going to be, or the world's going to be, for the next 4 to 8 years. People are calling this the greatest crisis since the Great Depression. And we haven't seen it really fully cascade through our economy yet, and job losses and everything else. Nobody knows what this entails. In conjunction with the war, in conjunction with global warming, in conjunction with a failing healthcare system and educational system. So what people have been looking at, if you look at the 2006 congressional elections, the Democratic Party garnered the under 30 support at a 60 to 32 rate. That was the greatest generational shift since 1932. Now, I don't know if many of you have studied generational history. I had to write the book. And something Brokaw, there was the GI generation, which Brokaw called the greatest generation. And their birth years were from 1901 to 1923. And they're the same age as this generation coming of age today with this presidential election. And what's interesting is that generation propelled Roosevelt into 4 terms: the New Deal, the defeat of fascism, overcoming the Depression, the Manhattan Project, the Marshall Plan to restructure Europe, the great unprecedented era of growth in the 1950s. And by the way, Kennedy was also a member of that generation and started the Apollo space program. I would say that we haven't seen in this country a generation of young people since that generation, 4 generations ago, that is of the characteristic that they can turn this mess around. Now, what's interesting about the youth, the number one characteristic of the generation, of all the things we tested 14 different attributes. And by the way, all the data is in the book. The whole survey's in there. And it's online too, and the crosstabs and everything else, so you can explore this as deeply as you wish. The transcripts of the focus groups as well, so you can read what people actually said. But the punchline of this is that technology, innovation, entrepreneurship are the things that drive this generation. They believe that they can create anything and do anything and achieve anything. And I'm a shareholder in Google, and it's my one equity position I'm still holding, I'll let you know. And it's because this is really a company that's built on the ethos of Generation We. It's a company that's about possibility, and that's how this generation thinks. And if we're going to ever get our way into a world which is sustainable, the most important thing is for us to have a very positive attitude, and then to take a bipartisan approach towards agreeing on an agenda. We can't pit right versus left anymore. We wrote an op-ed, and we called this generation the first, it's I think the first generation that we've had in a long time that is completely motivated by the greater good in a large measure. But it's post-partisan, post-ideological, and post-political. Only 16% pulled out as strong Democrats and 10% as strong Republicans. And the independents were, independents and weak leans were about 56% of the population. And then approximately, if you, depending on what numbers you look at, 50, 60, 70% said they'd support a third party, which is not realistic in our political system, the way the funding and infrastructure is set up right now to perpetuate a two-party system. So I believe, and I'm predicting, that this generation is going to take over one of the political parties, and I think that's most likely to be the Democratic Party, because the words conservative don't really resonate well with this generation. In fact, the generation doesn't like the word liberal either. It's a centrist generation. In fact, we have a great picture in the book I took myself at an Obama event that had this young guy standing up with a sign that said, "Not conservative and not liberal." And I think that's really what the generation is. It's a generation that's looking to, it's very sober about what it's inheriting, but it's looking for ways to solve the world's problems. And the reason for writing the book was this, is the generation and the world didn't know how powerful it was. And secondly, and this was the greatest revelation about this, was the generation is thinking alike. Gen We thinks alike. They're looking at the world the same way, and it doesn't matter what region, ethnicity, party affiliation, it doesn't matter. They're thinking pretty much the same way. Little policy issues may differ, but there's a lot more acceptance, and multiculturalism and everything else of other viewpoints, and people are now willing to focus on the big issues and not on the wedge issues. And this is why you see Obama with something like a 65% support number from Gen We right now. Now, I think Obama said something very interesting in his speech he made in Denver, which I had the privilege of attending. And he said, "This election's not about me, it's about something bigger." And I would agree with that. I think right now we're at a stage in our history when the world is about something bigger. And what we have to do is be, very focused on coming together to see how we go about solving the world's issues. And so one of the key takeaways in the book is getting, as a chapter, it says getting past the red and blue pill and having the clear vision. You got to stop taking pills. You got to have a clear vision, because the red pill and the blue pill are all funded by interest groups. And what you have to do is exert the strength of your political force and might. And it's not just the millennials or the Gen We's. We also have a chapter in the book we call the Grand Alliance. It's the caring, it's a legacy, the people that want to hand over legacy, the caring parents whose children are coming home with blown off limbs. It's the justice seekers. It's what Paul Ray, the sociologist, would call the cultural creatives. It's the fair-minded. It's people like me and all the other people that worked on this project. And I got to tell you, between the videos and the websites and the art and the book, there are probably 60 people that have worked on this project to make it happen, all working for much reduced rates. And I invested the money in it, and I'm not even, it's a write-off for me. I just donated it, and I didn't even set up a not-for-profit. I just did it because I felt so compelled that somebody had to go out there and put a real, sober definition of what issues the youth are facing, and then help them understand how they're thinking so that they, in turn, can mobilize and do something about it. So what does that mean? I'm predicting we're going to see 85 to 90% under 30 voter turnout of registered voters in this election, which will give us a yield of 60 to 70% voter turnout of under 30, which is unprecedented. I think last election was 49%, but don't quote me on that one, so I don't have the numbers right in front of me. But this is the most marked increase in under 30 voter turnout in American history. One of the things that presaged this was the primaries. We had 100 to 300% voter increases in the under 30 set for all the primaries and caucuses, and this is what enabled Senator Obama to defeat Senator Clinton in a very sharply contested primary that was just down to the wire and very close. It was the youth. And so likewise, the youth, I think, are going to propel whatever politics we have going forward, because 4 to 5 million of them hit the voting rolls every year. And this is probably the last close election of the traditional political set that we have today. I think what we're going to see is a more progressive and centrist time moving forward. But we have to be really serious. If we are going to get out of the situation we're in, we have $50 trillion of Medicare entitlements that our kids have to pay off. And that's up from $20 trillion in 2000. $50 trillion is increasing at 8% a year. $10 trillion in debt. Oh, by the way, the budget deficit's supposed to be $1 trillion next year. And They're just printing money to get us out of this financial crisis, which was caused by speculation and greed. People in this economy have made money off of speculation rather than making things. And those were the people that garnered the greatest rewards. So we had historic levels of M2 and M3 supply and extraordinary levels of leverage out there in the world that printed money that enabled the world economy to blossom over the last several years, I think in part to support a war that nobody wanted. If we had a bad economy in 2004, the administration wouldn't have been reelected. So one has to question what the fiscal policy of the United States was, I think in a really sober, realistic way. And so when you look at an agenda for reparation, what you have to do is you have to be completely based on the greater good. And I think we have to just get a few things out there. And the one biggest thing that we believe that can change the world is the invention of the next generation of energy, whether it's hydrogen fusion or something we haven't thought about yet, but free energy, if you will. Energy that's produced at its point of consumption. Because if you can take the world off the grid, I know a little bit about this because I had 2.5 million acres of wind rights where I was developing wind projects with impoverished Indian reservations in South Dakota. I had enough wind rights to power the city of Chicago, but I couldn't get a transmission line built or get enough transmission capacity to get the power from the Indian reservations in the Dakotas to Chicago or Minneapolis. Then when I tried to sell the power, I was basically blocked by a lot of coal-burning power plants and other things like that. And what was very interesting is the structural impediments, what Vice President Gore's talking about, of getting transmission built, that's important, and we got to do that. But the structural impediments from the environmental approvals and everything else that goes on, it's just nearly impossible to build transmission. I mean, our transmission grid's in tatters. So what we have to do is we have to develop and invent the next generation of energy. And what does that mean? That means no more emissions. It also means that desalination of ocean water, which is very energy intensive and expensive, becomes a reality. That means starvation and poverty are ended, because you can turn deserts into oases and you can reforest all the forests that have been chopped down, and people can be fed. And what ends up happening is countries will be rebuilt, and they won't have scarcity, they'll have plenitude. Nobody wants to fight when their bellies are full. People fight when they have lack. The other thing it does, it creates an entire new energy industry for the United States and our allies. If you think about how serious the problem is, let me give you a real understanding of this. Right now, 20% of the world does not have an adequate supply of clean water. That's over 1 billion people that don't have clean water every day. The oil rights of the Western United States have been bought up mostly by energy barons. I don't know if you know this. Water is going to become the new oil. In 30 years or so, it's predicted that over half the world isn't going to have an adequate supply of fresh water. Taking it a step further, if the polar caps melt at the rate they are, and we start seeing ocean levels increase, we're going to have massive repopulation efforts and disaster efforts that happen. And the only thing that's really going to change this is by taking immediate action now. So we're calling for an Apollo project, if you will. We call it Project Free, and we're calling for $30 to $40 billion a year of government spending on an individual department that's granted cabinet level authority, that has wartime powers and all the security clearances necessary, and that it has a 15-year deadline and it disbands. So that way we don't have another permanent bureaucracy. By the way, I'm a believer in balanced budgets and not overreaching governments and everything. I'm a centrist, more on the social liberal side, but I believe that we have to run the country like a business as well and make sure that our fiscal house is in order. And I don't want to see an ever increasing government bureaucracy. But by putting that together as an Apollo project, and that's what this Project Free action point in the video was, is if we can do that, that's the one thing that changes the world for the most, because it takes us out of oil conflicts and oil wars. It changes the entire nature of our atmosphere and environment. I'll give you an example around that. China and India produce 70% of their electricity with dirty coal. And I don't know if you know the difference between clean and dirty coal. Well, it's all, it all has emission, but dirty coal is fundamentally wet when it comes out of the ground. And I think between China and India, they're building 10 to 20 new coal plants a month to power their needs. And China has a lot of dirty coal. So what they're doing is they're just burning coal. And if you've ever been to China, except during the Olympics, you'll see that you can't see anything. You can't literally see a building on the next block from all the emissions. I think they have 17 cities where you can't see the sun at all, ever. And those that pollution is actually what's polluting California. That pollution is blowing overseas. The mercury poisoning that we have in our fish in the oceans much of it is induced by coal. And what ends up happening because of the magnetic structure of the the poles, is that it floats up towards the poles. And so the most remote areas where we have the big fish that we eat, like tuna and other things like that, the mercury drops right there. And so the more remote the ocean area, the more the mercury levels are, which is counterintuitive. A friend of mine who's an ocean scientist was telling me about this, and I found that very interesting because I don't eat meat or poultry. I just eat fish and vegetables. So I wonder if I'm radioactive. I don't know. So the whole takeaway of this thing is what we'd like to do with our websites and everything else is have 100,000 or more names to hand to the next president of people, of Americans, that want to see something like a Project Free happen. Now, it's something very interesting. We quote this quote in the book. It was President Roosevelt said this, and somebody came to him with a really good idea, and he said, "I'd like to do that. Now you got to go out and put pressure on me so I can go do it." You can't do anything without political will. So President, hopefully, Senator Obama, I'm supposed to be nonpartisan. Senator Obama or Senator McCain, whoever's elected president, what we want to do is be able to hand him this petition. But Senator Obama has already said he's going to spend $15 billion a year to reduce our dependence on foreign oil by 30% over the next 10 to 15 years. I don't think that's good enough. And I know that if John F. Kennedy could say we're going to put a man on the moon in 10 years and return to Earth safely and beat that, we can do this with the scientific resources and innovation resources we have at our disposal now. Let me tell you why they did the Apollo space program. It was because the Russians got to space and they thought that the communists were going to put nuclear missiles on the moon and basically destroy our freedom. The Manhattan Project in World War II was started based on intelligence from our intelligence agencies and British intelligence agencies that showed us that the Nazis were building a bomb, and we beat them by about 3 to 4 months. And had we not beat them to building that bomb, we would have probably not been here today, or been speaking a different language. Me being Jewish, I certainly would have been in this room. So we've had big challenges put in front of us before, and I don't think we have any bigger challenge today than to restore our economy, get back to a peaceful state, and fix the environment and end poverty and starvation. I can't think of anything more important. But one thing getting started that everybody can rally around and putting a win on our column can get us back to that state. So the whole notion of this book was to say there is a generation that's come about that can go out and achieve great things, that thinks a lot alike. And there are a lot of people that think the same way. And by the way, they have the numbers, and the numbers are there internationally. So Americans can lead and set the example. And hopefully what I am able to do is inspire some young leaders to come up and lead this generation and go out and create the change that we need. But we have to start off with small steps. And in the book we talk about things that everybody can do, whether you have only 15 minutes a day. We outline different things you can do. We show how this has happened before, whether it be the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, the Progressive Movement in the 1890s where we did all the trust busting, female suffrage, civil rights, the abolition of slavery. We've done some major things in this country when we've been pressed to the wall. I'm fundamentally an optimist. I think that we can actually make this work. But you know what? If things do not start changing now and we don't take massive action now, they're not going to stay the same. They're going to get worse. It's just not going to get miraculously better. It seems that in this administration we've had a lack of information and transparency about everything, about the war, financial markets. You know, I would not be surprised if Iraq looked like Katrina, but we can't get cameras in there to see if it really looks like that. There's been a lack of transparency. There's been a creeping totalitarianism which is reducing your civil rights. You know, they call it things like the Patriot Act and other things like that. If we don't do something about this now and seize our country back, and have the political will to do that, then we are in a very precarious situation, because we're going to have a lot of people that are trying to protect their interests before they die, and they don't have to worry about paying off that debt and paying the piper in the future with respect to the environment and other things like that. And so this book is a call to the youth to go out and mobilize and to do something about it. But it's more than just sitting behind the safety of your computer monitors and blogging. You got to make noise. You got to stop spending money with those that don't have your best interests in mind. You have to be politically active. You know, one of the things that I think we call them plunderers, you know, the plunderers who are plundering the earth alike, is the fact that a lot of bloggers are really loud and they rant online, but they don't stop traffic and they don't stop commerce. And I think that we have to figure out exactly what the next generation of nonviolent activism is. I don't condone violence whatsoever. We have to figure out what that next generation of activism is that actually gets people to pay attention and gets them to understand the political will. So with our website, we are taking you know, sign-ups for the movement. We're taking sign-ups for the petition for Project Free. And there's something in there I wrote called the Wii Declaration, which is basically modeled after the Declaration of Independence. And I actually wrote that before I wrote the book. And the book bore out what my hypothesis was. But you know, this, as Adam said, this was for me, it was kind of a very spiritual issue. I was in the Amazon jungle when I decided to write this, and I remember the day, I'll never forget it. It was September 29th, 2006. And something, you know, told me that, you know, I've been studying the Millennials since Adam pointed out 2004. And something just told me that, you know, the generation doesn't have an understanding of how powerful it is, and I wonder what they're thinking like. And so I set out to go out and figure that out, and then put together this book with the hope of inspiring people, and with the hope of putting a spark, you know, on a little fire, and letting that fire ignite so that people can reclaim their birthright and the American dream. Because let's make no mistake about it, I grew up poor. You know, I went to land-grant schools. I left home, you know, a week after I turned 17 years old. You know, and I've lived the American dream. I've done things that are amazing. But I don't think it's possible for a lot of young people, unless they're immensely gifted, or they come from privileged economic circumstances, to do the same today. In fact, it's much harder. I don't think I could have done what I've done in my life had I been coming of age today. And I think that's a tragedy. And that's something we haven't seen in this country. So if I have one message, it's now is the time for us to reclaim the American dream. If we're young, for ourselves, if we're my age, for our kids, and if, you know, if you're older, for your grandkids. You know, this is about the best hopes and aspirations of what this democracy was set up to do. And I want to take you back a little bit of history in the spirit of 1776. The founders of this country were in their 20s and 30s and a few in their 40s in 1776. And they wrote the Constitution in their 30s and 40s. They were young people. The youth wrote the Constitution of the United States, and they fought the Revolutionary War. So this notion of experience, Thomas Jefferson wasn't 60 years old when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. And so, you know, the far right, when they start calling people that are peace-loving and want to see a better world cowards, I think that they're more afraid of themselves, and they're more afraid than anybody else. World War I was won by a progressive president. World War II was won by a progressive president. And I think right now it's time for progressives to stand up and say enough. Enough is enough. And if the far right wants to point labels and say, oh, you're a coward, you're not American, country first. You know, I'm better than you because, you know what, I towed a gun. Wait a second here. You know, I don't hear any of these candidates in this election talking about $70 trillion in debt and what they're going to do to retire it. I don't hear any of them talking about a lot of these issues. So, you know, what we have to do is we have to go out and make this happen, and that's what this book's all about. And I think it's the beginning of a dialogue. And with that, Adam?
People have people have questions, we can pass the mic around. And if you are in another conference room, do they unmute themselves? Is that how that works? Okay, you're unmuted. Great.
First, thanks for coming, Eric. And just curious if you're able to, or if you know why there's been that shift towards the center that you saw in the millennials. Is it practical? Is it just kind of fed up from the rhetoric on the right and the left, or how did they wind up being as centrist as they seem to be?
Well, if you look at when they came, is my mic on? Okay. If you look at when they came to age, let's say 8 years ago in 2000, 22 years old, you've seen 8 years of, very, very nasty partisan politics. And so I think the number is like 73% or something saw the Democrats and Republicans alike failing in the country. So I think they became centrist because they saw the partisan squabbling that really started happening in 1994 when we had the contract in America. Other things occur. It's just been a nonstop litany of partisan politics and bickering and other things like that. And I think that's what's really affected them. That being the first thing, the squabbling. The second thing is just the situation in the world is getting worse and worse, and nobody seems to have a solution or a plan. I think they're not overwhelmingly Democrat because the Democrats have yet to come up with a plan, if you will. And the Republicans' plan has been about less regulation and concentration of resources and consolidation of government power, which I think is anathema to the young. So I think that would be the natural explanation, but that would be a lot of studying to try to figure out exactly what tilted them to the center.
Yeah, I was interested in your perspective in terms of the strengths and weaknesses of the project-free approach versus, say, that of a T. Boone Pickens in terms of the energy area.
I say doing both. Project-free is about inventing the future. And only the government can do that because you don't have, you don't have annual, you don't have quarterly profits and other things like that, and you're going to try a lot of things that may not work. And so you have to do deep, deep, deep research. Remember, the internet was a DARPA project in the 60s, and Google's a great beneficiary of that today, in 2008. I think that we have to do everything we can immediately to reverse our dependence on foreign sources and get to cleaner energy. So whether it's Al Gore's plan or T. Boone Pickens, what he's talking about, we should do that. But we should also invest, the $30 or $40 billion a year to invent the next generation because, if you think about it this way, we're using 100-year-old technology, the oil and gas platforms, now with a few semiconductors thrown in. We're using the same technology we used 100 years ago because a lot of people have a lot invested in that. Well, imagine if we had a bunch of really wealthy people that in 1948 decided that IBM was doing very well with vacuum tubes and we should just stay that way for the next 100 years. We wouldn't be here right now. So, I think that we have to do both. And we have to do everything. It's an all-hands-on-deck thing. And who knows what we'll find out, if we take deep research into transmission, we might find that it's more than just direct, DC lines, high capacity DC lines. We might find that we can use photons or something else and transmit energy in another way based on deep research. So that might even excel or propel those plans to be even more effective. But I say we do everything we can right now to put all hands on deck.
How do you see increases in population size or decreases in some parts of the world affecting us in the next 30 years or so?
Well, where the population is increasing is in Asia and the Middle East and very poor areas of the world. So there's going to be a lot more stress on the politics of the world to feed people, and there's going to be a lot more, the younger population will cause a lot more contention over resources and conflict over resources. I think we'll find that will be a financial drain on the countries of the West, the mature countries of the West and Western Europe and the United States, because we'll be seen still as the policemen of the world, and we'll also be looking to create political stability so that we don't have domestic threats. And so that will end up taking a lot of our resources unless we figure out a way to make those countries sufficient to themselves. I think that it's a good thing and a bad thing. The good side is that hopefully if enough young people around the world come together through the internet and other ways on a common agenda, that's an opportunity. It's a bad thing if they're repressed and they're made into serfs, if you will, and we see what we have happening in Darfur and other areas where people have been forgotten. and their rampant, reproduction rates without any check on that.
Even if this generation is kind of centrist, you'd mentioned that they have progressive leanings in a lot of ways, or at least anti-conservative leanings. But there's the argument still that if you're young and Republican, you're heartless. If you're old and Democratic, you're brainless. Like, how do you reconcile that with the possibility of, is this generation really all that different from previous generations in their political leanings? Is it that we just haven't become jaded and, are going to turn a little bit more conservative as time goes on? And I actually don't necessarily buy that argument, but I just want to know how you reconcile that.
What's interesting is that marketers say, they target people. I mean, I know my kids get barraged by 10,000 fast food and junk food ads a year. So marketers say that people's basic buying decisions and brand decisions to life are done by the time they're 25 years old. That's why we see so much marketing at the youth. Let's talk about conservatism a second. There is moral conservatism, and then there's political conservatism. And so when you have a family and you're looking to make sure that your kids can go to school and everything, you're probably more conservative about how you go out and spend your money on the weekends. But that doesn't mean necessarily that you lose your compassion and other things like that. For instance, the older I've gotten, I don't do a lot of the crazy things I used to do when I was young, like we all did, because I have kids now and I have a family and I have responsibilities. But what I found is I've become more liberal in how I think about other people and my devotion to a greater good in society. I think that it's when people say that, it's a great injustice to the greater good ethos of people in general. Because when I was growing up, I got out of high school in '81, so I was a Reagan Republican. Everybody was at the time. We had a horrible economy, a stagflation, 16% interest rates. We had the Iran, hostage crisis. I mean, it was a landslide. So everybody, it was like an Obama thing. Everybody's like, Reagan, he's our savior. And then all of a sudden, after I got sober, I realized that there was more to the world than just conservatism, and I switched parties. I went back to my original party. I was on Republican Talk Radio, which I've been doing a lot of lately, arguing with the hosts, and it's been quite fun. And I was asked a question by a caller, and he quoted Winston Churchill with that same quote. And I reminded the man that Winston Churchill had nationalized health care. I also reminded him that Barry Goldwater started pension plans and health care for all of his employees, and he's the founder of the conservative movement in the United States. So I don't think that being humane is something that people lose. I think that's something that's within people. And I think we're in a world where it's really come front and center with the environment, the healthcare, and the education crises. I don't think that's going to change, in people, the deep parts of their hearts. But you know what you're going to get more concerned about as you get older? I can tell you, you're going to get more concerned about your budgets, where you send your kids to school, about if they're abusing substances and all that. That's being a little bit more conservative because you're getting older. You don't have that, that idealism of youth, everything is new and you're experiencing everything. That kind of goes away a bit. But, what doesn't go away, and this is why men have midlife crises, what doesn't go away is that little pit in your heart of that inner soul that wants to go out and be something and flourish. That never goes away for people. And I think that people that are afraid of themselves and afraid of confronting themselves lose that even more so. So, that's a very spiritual issue for me is how do I, refresh and renew myself. But I think that, at the end of the day, if you're a compassionate person, you practice compassion, you're likely to always be a compassionate person unless something really bad happens to you. And God forbid that happens. So I just, I think that there are a lot of metaphors and colloquialisms that get used in the world that explain away things and let people categorize things and write them off. But I think we're onto something much, much, much more here. I mean, female suffrage wouldn't have happened, the civil rights movement wouldn't have happened, apartheid wouldn't have ended, if the flame in people's hearts went away as they got older. They got stronger and stronger and stronger. And I think we're at that point right now with your generation.
questions? Any more questions? Any questions from the other rooms? I guess I'll pose one more question. Props 4 and 8 in California are getting a lot of attention and are probably two of the more divisive propositions on the ballot. There are a lot of propositions kind of across the country that are taking similar themes of trying to take issues and really kind of divide people on them. Do you think we're going to see a rise in these types of ballot measures? Will they just be defeated or passed, and we'll see a proliferation of them? What's your outlook on that?
This is the most brilliant political move that people that want to polarize people from getting together can do. And I'll go specifically to the gay marriage issue in a second. If you remember when Gray Davis was recalled, Darrell Issa and people that funded this trucked in people from Nevada paying them $5 an hour or something like a certain amount of money per petition sign up. So actually it was Nevada citizens coming in and calling a recall on a sitting governor who won a popular vote. Things like that, or putting divisive issues like gay marriage or choice or one fringe issue and saying that that's the fringe issue of the day, and they polarize people around that so people are obscured from looking at the big picture, I think is probably the best way a minority can do, a minority political interest can do to hang on to its power. So I think we're going to see a proliferation of it. And they're going to make that into the major issue versus paying off $70 trillion in debt and getting us out of war and cleaning the environment and stopping people from starving to death. And then they're going to scare us at the airports. When we have record crops of opium right now happening in Afghanistan, in a country which we allegedly control, and all that stuff finds its way to the inner cities, but yet it's hard to even get through an airport. And all that stuff can find its way here in places that we're controlling. I think we're going to see a lot more of this kind of thing. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this divisive stuff. I think what people have to do is just have to see through it and have the BS filter on, and be able to just read what it is and not get caught up in the minutia of these campaigns, but understand that behind every campaign, there is another campaign. And there's another set of agenda setters setting that agenda that most people don't even know who they are. In fact, a lot of the money that comes into those campaigns is so shielded and masked that nobody knows where it comes from. It just comes from an interest group that has something to protect.
If there aren't any more questions, then thanks so much for coming.
Well, thanks for having me, and please forward the video to everybody. It's on YouTube. And it's doing very well today. So forward to everybody you know, and please sign the Project Free petition and let everybody know about that, because what we'd like to do is go to the next president and hand that to the president and say, here you go, here's some political will, and turn a news event out of it. Because it's something, what's interesting, the Republicans and Democrats that we polled both supported it. In fact, the Republicans were more vehement about it. They're like, this is right, American innovation, national security, yeah, and it's something everybody agreed on. And so I think, the best way for us to repair our future is to have one thing that we can agree on and start there. And then that creates a legacy of more things, or the possibility of more things. So I thank you for your time. And as you can tell, I'm probably I'm very passionate about this, and put 18 hard months and a lot of money into it. And a lot of great people worked with me on making this happen. And I'm greatly thankful to all them. I'm just very lucky to be able to been given the opportunity where I could actually contribute this to the world. I think that's a privilege, and it's certainly a privilege speaking to you all here today. And as a shareholder, thank you very much for your hard work. I really appreciate it.